because an excellent spirit was in him. And the king thought to set him over all the realm. Second scripture is from Colossians chapter 3, verse 17. And it reads, "And whatever you do in word or deed, do all in the name of the Lord, giving thanks to God and the Father by him." I call these two principles the power twins. The power twins of excellence and attitude. One of the interesting things about Daniel was that Daniel was a captured slave, but yet he rose to the highest heights because of his excellence and his attitude. I was talking recently with a friend of mine, and we were talking about the hospitality industry. And he shared with me, he said, I built my house off of the hospitality industry. So I said, explain what you mean. He said, well, I served as a waiter and maitre d' and so on. And he said, routinely, persons who came in, they would give him, $3,000 or $5,000 as a tip. And so I asked him, I said, well, what do you think was that? He said, because I served with excellence and I had a good attitude. People were not paying for a meal. They were paying for excellence and attitude. One of the good things about the Bahamas that we have slipped in is our excellence and our attitude. We as a hospitality nation, we have been renowned for friendliness and excellence in service. But I think in many ways we have slipped. So today I'm here to remind you that these power twins are still one of the keys to our personal and collective success. So let's remember Daniel and continue to serve in excellence. Some people try to combine excellence and arrogance, but you need excellence with a good attitude. And once we operate in that, both personally, professionally, and collectively as a country, it will serve us better, and we will regain or resume our march to higher heights. Amen? Amen. Let's bow our heads together. Father God, we just thank you for this wonderful day that we have before us. And Lord, we thank you that as usual, we gather here to conduct the business of the country. We thank you for your guidance. We thank you for your spirit to direct us so that the decisions we make and the words we speak would be in line with your will for our country. And God, we thank you and we ask that you would continue to bless every member of this house. And Father, we pray that together we would be reminded and we would walk in excellence and with the best attitude going forward. In Jesus' name, amen. Our Father, hallowed be thy name, thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen.
Desmond Bannister, Renwood Wells, Jeffrey Lloyd, Dr. Greenstein, Marvin Bain, Frankie Campbell, Lucille Gregler, Michael Pintar, Darren Henfield, Ramal Ferreira, Lanisha Rule, Grenville Rule, Ellsworth Johnson, Philip Davis, Vaughn Miller, Patricia Parker Edson, Aaron Lewis, Carlton Boland, James Aldry, Travis Robinson, Adrian Gibson, Donald Saunders, Frederick McElpine, Hank Johnson, Mark Hume, Michael Folk, Miriam Recky Emmanuel, Bruce Chipman, Ruben Ramming, Ricky Massey, Shannon Dawn Cartwright, Chanel Ferguson, Leonard Hannah Martin, Tyson Ford, Chester Cooper.
Good morning, honorable members. Honorable members, I have in my hand a copy of a newly published book that I would recommend to all of us and to the Bahamian public. If you can zoom in on it, it's a book about the biography of the Honorable James Oswald Ingram. It's written by Diane Darkouts, and there's a foreword by the Reverend Father James Moultrie, PhD. If you can zoom in on it for me. Of course, we all know that the Honorable James Oswald Ingram is a predecessor in the office of the Speaker of this Honorable House. And my understanding now is that he's not doing so well medically. So as we read this book, we can also offer up some prayers for him, and we can make a larger contribution than the $10 price for the book to assist in any which way we can. I would highly recommend it to all citizens of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. Thank you. Introduction and swearing in of new members. Laying of documents by ministers. The chair recognizes the honorable member for Bamboo Town.
We do have some laying of documents with the Speaker.
The chair recognizes the honorable member for Kalani.
I have no fingers on too.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Speaker, I beg leave to lay on the table of the House a copy of the following. Emergency Powers COVID-19 Pandemic Number 10, Amendment Order 2020.
Order that the document be brought up. Order that the document do lie on the table. Further laying of documents.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to lay on the table of the House a copy of the following. Emergency Powers COVID-19 Pandemic Number 11, Order 2020.
Order that the document be brought up. Order that the document do lie on the table. Further laying of documents.
Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to lay on the table of the House a copy of the following. Emergency Powers COVID-19 Pandemic Number 11, Amendment Order 2020.
Order that the document be brought up. Order that the document do lie on the table. Further laying of documents.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I beg leave to lay on the table of the House a copy of the following. Emergency Powers COVID-19 Pandemic Number 12, Order 2020.
Order that the document be brought up. Order that the document do lie on the table. Further laying of documents.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I beg leave lay on tables also a copy of the following. The Bahamas Registered Stock Directions 2020, Bahamas Registered Stocks number 12, 2023, 2025, 2027, 2030, 2040, and 2050.
Order that the documents be brought up. Order that the document do lie on the table. Further laying of documents. Chair recognizes the honorable member for Bamboo Town.
Speaker, there are no further laying of documents by ministers.
Thank you, honorable member. Statements and communications by ministers. The chair recognizes the honorable member for Kalani.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'm going to do two communications today. Mr. Speaker, I wish to provide the House and the country with a general update on the nation's ongoing efforts to respond to the COVID-19 pandemic. Recently, I announced restrictive measures for mainland Exuma and mainland Eleuthera due to exponential increases in new COVID cases on those islands. As of yesterday, the 17th of November, there were a total of 99 confirmed cases of COVID-19 on Exuma, and on Eleuthera, a total of 143 confirmed cases. A team from the Ministry of Health, made up of members of the contact tracing team and the surveillance unit, is currently on the ground in Exuma to assess the COVID-19 situation. Health officials reported that from the preliminary analysis of the map of cases, the spread is occurring throughout Exuma. And from the interviews conducted in the community by the health team, some people are still having gatherings, and residents believe this is largely contributing to the spread of COVID-19 on Exuma. Speaker, I want to repeat that it's believed that the problems that we face in Exuma are related to gatherings or, in common language, partying and having a great time. A health team is scheduled to return to Eleuthera next week to complete a follow-up assessment and to determine the impact of the recently imposed restrictive measures on that island. On Grand Bahama, health officials report that the recent increase in cases on the island is due to a recent outbreak at an industrial company. The industrial site has been closed, and a meeting is expected to be held this week with the industrial group and their subcontractors to review the analysis of the outbreak at that site. All positive cases from that site remain in quarantine or in isolation. Health officials continue to closely monitor Exuma, Eleuthera, and Grand Bahama. The Ministry of Health will provide a further update at its press briefing. I wish to remind every family island and key, especially those not under curfew, to continue to abide by health protocols, including wearing a mask, adhering to physical distancing, and washing hands regularly. I also ask, Mr. Speaker, I beg, please, to the Bahamian populace, avoid all large gatherings and social events. As we have seen on other islands, and as domestic and international tourists begin to travel to more family islands, there's a greater likelihood of the spread of this deadly virus. And to avoid restrictive measures, I ask every Bahamian, no matter which island, settlement, or community you live in, to please follow the well-known healthcare measures. Wearing a mask is a life-saving measure, just as are antibiotics and medicine for other health challenges and diseases. No responsible person would tell someone with high blood pressure, diabetes, or an infection not to take their medicine and not to take it in a timely manner. Just like these medicines, the public health measures help to prevent infections and save lives. Mr. Speaker, we wear seatbelts while driving and flying for our protection. We should also wear masks and avoid large social gatherings to protect our own health and the health of others. Let me briefly clarify two frequently asked questions in the public domain. Church services in the sanctuary are permitted during the week on New Providence and Abaco in accordance with the guidelines established by the Bahamas Christian Council. Mr. Speaker, I think it's important for me to clarify that because there are some who believe that church services are limited to only Saturday and Sunday. That is not the case. Memorial services and services in funeral parlors are not permitted on New Providence or Abaco. Mr. Speaker, most of the world, including popular tourist destinations, have put in place extensive protocols for tourists and for returning residents and citizens who have traveled overseas. The Bahamas is no different. We are following various international protocols and adjusting them as necessary. As we are set to receive an increase in international visitors next month, I wish to repeat that everyone traveling into the Bahamas from the US or any other destination must have a valid negative COVID-19 RT-PCR test. And this test must be taken no more than 5 days from the day of travel. Mr. Speaker, we are getting many reports of Bahamians having a COVID PCR test taken in the Bahamas prior to their travel overseas and then attempting to use those results for their travel health visa and return here to the Bahamas. I wish to be very clear and remind Bahamians and residents traveling overseas that no COVID-19 RT-PCR test taken in the Bahamas is valid for a travel health visa in order to return to the Bahamas. Mr. Speaker, everyone, including citizens, residents, and visitors entering the Bahamas, must also have the International Travel Health Visa. These new travel and entry protocols have now gone into effect. These create a two-pronged approach to fight COVID-19, inclusive of health screening survey and testing. For anyone, including citizens, residents, and visitors, staying longer than 4 nights and 5 days in the country, A rapid antigen test must be administered on the 5th day of their arrival in the Bahamas. There are places to obtain these tests throughout the Bahamas. Where there are no private medical facilities, government clinics may be used. In addition to these public health measures, the Ministry of Health and Ministry of Tourism have launched a daily online health screening survey. And this survey is provided through the travel.gov.bs website. All individuals, including citizens, residents, and visitors traveling into the Bahamas, will be required to complete this short survey online each day for approximately 14 days. The Speaker, as most of our guests leave our shores within 5 days, those individuals would only be required to complete this survey, or what we would call a risk analysis survey, for 5 days. Only those who are beyond 5 days to 14 would be required to extend it to 14 days. And that is because, Mr. Speaker, the incubation period of this virus is 14 days, and most individuals tend to seroconvert between the 5th and 7th day. But that does not exclude an individual from seroconverting on 10th or 11th day, and hence the incubation period. The health screening survey, or as we would call the risk analysis, is an important part of preventing the spread of COVID-19 and ensuring that the Bahamas are safe for all to enjoy. Participation in this survey is mandatory. Those who fail to comply will be subject to penalties. So I want to repeat again, those, especially for the Ministry of Tourism, that as most of our visitors leave our shores within 5 days, they are only required to complete the risk analysis during their stay, which is 4 or 5 days respectively. Citizens, residents, and visitors who do not complete the survey will be fined $100 per day or 1 week imprisonment. The health survey will enable the further monitoring of and response to any possible instances of COVID-19. The Ministry of Health will also be studying the results of the health survey to significantly test and evaluate the health protocols. Mr. Speaker, very soon, a domestic travel health visa will also be implemented for travel from New Providence, Grand Bahama, Abaco, mainland Exuma, mainland Eleuthera, and Bimini to other islands in the country. Mr. Speaker, let me explain so many can understand. If an individual is traveling from what we would call a sterile environment, for example, Inagua, who has no cases of COVID, Maguana, French Crooked Island, Ragged Island, Rum Key, San Salvador, individuals traveling from those areas which are considered sterile would not need such a visa. If, on the other hand, when they land into the infected areas, New Providence, Grand Bahama, Eleuthera, Exuma, etc., in order to leave those areas, you would be required to have a travel visa. Because that would allow us, Mr. Speaker, to monitor the situation so as to minimize, if not remove, the possibility of them taking back a virus into a sterile area. But sterile to sterile, no problems with transportation. So, Mr. Speaker, this does not apply to travel between Exuma and its keys, Eleuthera and its surrounding islands. The domestic health visa will replace the 14-day quarantine requirement for those traveling from New Providence. The question has been asked by members of the press repeatedly about the quarantine in the Family Islands. Once the domestic travel visa is in place, then the quarantine will fall away, being replaced by the questionnaire, risk assessment analysis daily, and the 5-day rapid test. And there'd be no need for quarantine. And as I said earlier, that is expected to be implemented very soon. And I know the press would like a day, but I would not want to give a day that I cannot commit nor adhere to. I would say very soon, with capital letters. The domestic travel health visa, like the international travel health visa, will include the same two-pronged approach to fight COVID-19, inclusive of the daily health screening survey and the rapid antigen testing on the 5th day, as I've just spoken about. And this domestic travel health visa must be presented to air and sea carrier operators before boarding an aircraft or marine vessel. If this requirement is breached or violated, the carrier or owner of the vessel is subject to a fine of $2,000 for every passenger traveling without the domestic travel health visa. Speaker, that is important because if these protocols are violated and individuals travel to sterile environments without the necessary protocol, then yes, they may feel that they're just catching a ride, but they would run the risk of introducing the virus in those areas. And it's essential that we do all that we possibly can to ensure that those sterile areas remain sterile, and to ensure that we protect our archipelagic nation. The passenger, Mr. Speaker, will also be subject to a fine of $1,000. I wish also to note that for the time being, a negative COVID PCR test is required only for travel from New Providence, Grand Bahama, and Exuma. Mr. Speaker, we are very fortunate here in the Bahamas. Our public health measures have worked and are working. We have brought the virus numbers down in the pandemic's second wave. However, across North America and Europe, cases are surging at a record pace. Some are saying that the coming winter will be a disaster. It will be a dark winter, and some are even saying that it will be hell. Hospitalizations are so much on the rise that in some jurisdictions, they have run out of hospital beds, and others are transporting patients from one state to another in order to seek medical care. And others are even advising patients that the hospital beds in the hospital have reached capacity, and therefore they should stay home and manage themselves because the hospitals cannot accommodate them. Mr. Speaker, again, we are fortunate in that our numbers within the hospitals are decreasing, and our medical personnel and our surveillance team and health personnel in general are doing an excellent job. And we would not like to meet or reach that level of chaos within our society. Large field hospitals have been erected to take care of the overwhelmingly number of sick patients. Deaths, Mr. Speaker, have increased too. In some jurisdictions that did not or refused to require masks are now mandating mask wearing. something the Bahamas did at the beginning of this pandemic. So, Mr. Speaker, the Bahamas, under the advice of its medical team, were in the forefront of this pandemic and got out aggressively, quickly, and decisively. And hence, we can see the results that we're seeing, and we watch others on a meltdown. Countries that did generally well in the first wave, including the developed world, are now experiencing an alarming increase in cases. In response to the surge in the Americas and Europe, countries and jurisdictions are implementing other aggressive restrictions. These range from curfews and selective closures all the way to full national lockdown for a period of many weeks. What is deeply concerning is that public health experts expect conditions to worsen as it gets colder and more people are indoors. Mr. Speaker, I cannot stress enough that as many Bahamians as possible should receive the flu vaccine to continue to protect themselves. Outside of that, you can be bombarded by not only the flu virus, but the COVID virus. In combination, can be even more detrimental and place additional stress and strain on your health facilities. And these flu vaccines are offered free, and many of the various different constituencies are likewise offering flu vaccines. And I would encourage as many as possible to please obtain the flu vaccine. It is important that as a people, we watch responsible and fact-driven news and keep informed as to what is happening globally. The Bahamas, Mr. Speaker, again, is doing extremely well in its pandemic response. And we should be very grateful for this. We have battled through the waves, learning what works and learning what does not work. We have refined our policies to allow for as much opening up as possible. And when the conditions call for tightening, we do so, but only as much as is necessary. Bahamians should be proud of their country, of our health experts, and of our medical personnel. We should be proud, Mr. Speaker, that this little Bahamas is fighting through the worst global public health crisis in 100 years. Mr. Speaker, as a result of the extraordinary spike in cases in North America and Europe, and the ongoing challenges in the Americas as a whole, as Prime Minister, I advise all Bahamians not to travel outside of the country at this time, unless for an emergency. Mr. Speaker, I want to repeat that. I advise all Bahamians to not travel out of our country at this particular time, unless absolutely necessary. There are several reasons why I offer this advice. The record number of cases in the northern countries means there is significant viral transmission there. Traveling to a COVID hotspot could cause you to catch it. Additionally, as I mentioned, many countries have overwhelmed hospital system. If you get in a foreign country that is overwhelmed by COVID-19, it might be very difficult to get medical treatment. Additionally, as we saw in the first wave, when viral cases surge, countries may quickly change their travel policies. Borders could be shut suddenly with no set time as to when they may reopen. Therefore, Mr. Speaker, Bahamians traveling abroad, if international borders are shut suddenly, they can find themselves in a situation where they're trapped and cannot return. Imagine if someone decides to take a 4-day pleasure trip and only carry enough money for that time. Then all of a sudden, the country closes its borders for months. How would they take care of themselves? How would they afford food and accommodation? And when would they be able to come home? It is exceptionally risky to leave the Bahamas at this time. And therefore, I beg and I plead with all Bahamians to stay home unless it is absolutely necessary to travel overseas. Walmarts can wait. I know, Mr. Speaker, there's COVID fatigue. We are all undergoing COVID fatigue. I know that many people want a break. If someone needs to take a break, they might consider going to one of our family islands where travel is permitted following the public health guidelines. I ask Bahamians to spend that money in the Bahamas with Bahamian businesses that employ Bahamians. They will have a good time and will help our economy. We should be careful and sensible when it comes to where we travel. We could have a very difficult third wave if we are lax in our behavior and in our travels. If you have to go overseas because of an emergency, please wear a mask, maintain physical distancing, avoid large gatherings, and wash your hands thoroughly and often. Mr. Speaker, I want to remind Bahamians that we were one of the first countries to enter the second wave. I would stand the reason that we should be one of the first to come out of the second wave. Our second wave, Mr. Speaker, people don't like to hear facts. Our second wave is as a result of 4,224 Bahamians traveling to our northern neighbors that were considered hotspots. Many subsequently became infected and brought it home. The data and the facts would reveal that when our borders were open, less than 1% of the infections that we had experienced during this time were as a result of our guests or tourists. Over 99% of the infections were as a result of us. Mr. Speaker, I remind individuals, because it's even more important, the surge that we see and the level that we see in our northern neighbors is now worse than we saw when we entered the first wave. And therefore, there's an even greater chance of individuals becoming infected. And thus they can throw us in a third wave, which can be worse than what we've seen in a second wave. And therefore, our destiny is determined, our future is determined by them. That simple trip abroad into what I would call a COVID Coliseum can result in bringing the virus back, subsequently endangering the opening of our hotels, who are making arrangements to open, and thus placing thousands of Bahamians at risk and not being able to commence their employment. You would place straw vendors at risk, and they too would not be able to commence their skills and their employment. Tour buses would likewise not be able to commence their employment. That extends to taxi drivers, the jet ski operators, and, Mr. Speaker, lastly, it extends to yourself and your family. So what that simple trip can do is result in the commencement of a third wave and alter the plans of our hotels opening, alter the plans of our economy starting, and alter the plans of our employment, our straw vendors, jet ski operators, etc. Mr. Speaker, I ask again, vehemence, that the record speak for itself, that we travel only if absolutely necessary. And if we were to do that, then our hotels and other entities would be able to open with great comfort and safety. And if we continue to follow the mitigation protocol by the Ministry of Health, we can possibly have a wonderful Christmas. In the absence of that, Mr. Speaker, I can only say that I would not like to witness a third wave because of the impact it can have on our health system. And I don't think any member in this Parliament, outside of medical professionals, can basically visualize the impact of a collapsed healthcare system and an overburdened or overworked health staff. The Speaker, the same what I spoke briefly about, it also applies to social gatherings and partying. They too can force us into a third wave, and therefore we must be very careful with our behavior. I know that is difficult because by nature, we are social animals. That's our nature. And therefore, to change one culture overnight is extremely difficult. But sometimes you must ask individuals to be disciplined, if even just for 1 month. Just that brief discipline can save an entire nation, the future of the nation, and the economy. Mr. Speaker, we are progressing through the pandemic. There's increased hope that medical innovations are on the way to bring it to an end. In recent weeks, there were 2 encouraging announcements in the United States regarding vaccine candidates. Both vaccines demonstrated high levels of success in phase 3 trials. There is hope that medical frontline workers in the U.S. may begin to be vaccinated as soon as next month. While we all should be pleased with this success, we must be very realistic with our timelines. It will take time before newly approved vaccines in the developed world become available in the developing world. We are working with the World Health Organization and others to secure vaccines for the Bahamas. And Mr. Speaker, the Minister of Health and his team of health professionals are aggressively working on a national plan so that we will be prepared whenever the vaccine is available for the Bahamas that they would have been proactive and ready to commence the process. And I want to say to Bahamians, there are a lot of rumors about vaccines, etc. But be assured that whenever the vaccine is introduced into the Bahamas, I most certainly will be one of the first to receive the vaccine. Until that time, Mr. Speaker, we must keep up with our public health measures of mask wearing, physical distancing, and hand washing, sanitizing. Mr. Speaker, I hear the noise in the background, but I would hope to God that those individuals are wearing their masks. These measures work, Mr. Speaker. They are saving lives. The virus has caused restrictions and disruptions all over the world. The virus has slowed economic activity at different times and to different degrees all over the world. Despite the difficulty of the times, I am confident that the Bahamas will overcome. Most of our people largely comply with the public health measures, and I thank them for following the public health measures. Our people, Mr. Speaker, are very resilient. Our people are hardworking. And our people will get through this together. Yes. The COVID-19 pandemic has been difficult, but it has not broken our spirit to thrive and to prosper. The truth is that the Bahamas is doing much better than many countries in the world. It is truly sad and deeply unfortunate that some people aggressively opposed the most recent emergency orders passed in the House. The measures in the orders, which are similar to measures throughout the world, which helped to significantly bring down the number of cases and helped to save lives. On another occasion, Mr. Speaker, I will have much more to say to those who oppose the extension of the emergency orders. Mr. Speaker, with vaccines emerging, there is light and hope on the horizon. Bahamians should remain focused and stay positive in their outlook. They should ignore those who are endlessly and predictably negative and those who always complain about the Bahamas or root for failure. Instead, let us celebrate those who are helping our country to get through this unprecedented time. The Bahamas is a great little country with extraordinary people, and many Bahamians are impressed at how our doctors, our nurses, our medical professionals have cared for the sick. And Mr. Speaker, I am proud to say I belong to that noble profession of physicians. Many are impressed with how our businesses have helped enforce the public health measures. I am impressed with the NGOs who partnered with the government-funded feeding program to provide food for tens of thousands of Bahamians in need due to economic fallout of the pandemic, and who are now focusing strictly on the most vulnerable in our communities. To date, the government of the Bahamas has spent approximately $18 million on the food assistance for our people. Mr. Speaker, I only want to note that as I watch the international news, you would see miles and miles of cars lined up in various different states, lining up for food assistance programs. So the Bahamas is not unique in assisting its citizens. It's happening in first world countries. For those countries, there are miles and miles of individuals lining up. So I want to thank the task force who have done an excellent job, and the Ministry of Social Service, led by Minister Frankie Campbell. I want to thank them for the excellent job they've done in terms of delivering food and assisting our people. I am impressed, Mr. Speaker, with the new small business owners who are turning crisis into opportunity and hope for the future. We have to fight for our future together. We will give all a better future. Our future will be better once we keep working together in a spirit of love and a spirit of love. Speaker, may God continue to bless each and every one of us, and may God continue to bless the Commonwealth of Ghana. Thank you.
Thank you, Honorable Member. Order that the communications be brought up. Order that the communication to lie on the table. Further statements and communications by ministers. The chair recognizes the Honorable Member for Kalani.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Speaker, as members would be aware, this Honorable House approved the Fiscal Responsibility Act 2018, which sets out parameters for the development and presentation of an annual fiscal strategy report, FSR. The FSR provides a medium-term macro fiscal framework that underpins Rashad from Tribune, you're a good man. You speak well of Kalani. You're a good man. The House records would reflect that the Prime Minister said Rashad from the Tribune is a good man. The FSR, Mr. Speaker, Fiscal Strategy Report provides a medium-term macro fiscal framework that underpins and informs the preparation of the government's annual budgets. It sets out the government's strategic priorities with respect to revenue collection, spending, and financing over the medium-term horizon. Since the release of the inaugural FSR in 2018, the government has continued to make good on its statutory commitment to fiscal transparency and accountability. We initiated quarterly budget performance reporting and have never missed a cycle since inception. In keeping with our commitment and obligations, I rise to share the status of the 2020 Fiscal Strategy Report, which the government is required to present to the House of Assembly by the third Wednesday in November. Mr. Speaker, given the fluid nature of the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic and its economic impact, my cabinet and I have agreed that the prudent thing to do is to defer final deliberations and release the FSR to December. Mr. Speaker, the duration and intensity of this health crisis remains uncertain, although there have been recent positive developments on the medical front. The sharp and ongoing revisions to the macroeconomic forecast produced by various international agencies, including the International Monetary Fund, confirmed the difficulties in developing firm macroeconomic forecasts. As members would be aware, the important and necessary policy measures implemented to effectively manage the public health emergency exerted significant pressure on the country's fiscal position. While we expect reopening of tourism on November 1st to have a growing positive impact on near-term macroeconomic conditions, the government is seeking to make use of the most current information to the extent possible to inform critical policy deliberations. Mr. Speaker, let me reiterate that the government of Bahamas is committed to the highest standards of fiscal transparency and accountability, and is taking extra diligence in crafting our strategies for revenue and expenditure. Even amidst these unusually volatile times, we will seek to ensure that our forecasts are aligned as closely as possible to our overarching fiscal sustainability goals. I thank you very much.
Thank you, Honorable. Order that the communication be brought up. Order that the communication do lie on the table. Further statements and communications by ministers. The chair recognizes the honorable member for Southern Shores.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I give thanks to Almighty God for another opportunity to stand in this place and represent the good people of Southern Shores who have reposed their confidence in me. I want to commend the people of Southern Shores for their adherence to the COVID-19 protocols. I haven't gotten much news of infections in the constituency, and I am satisfied that it is as a result of the discipline, and I want to encourage them to continue to wear their masks, exercise physical distancing, and proper sanitizing and washing of hands. Mr. Speaker, I also want to take the opportunity to remind particularly our younger persons to take advantage of all that is being offered through the Small Business Development Center. And they will find information on our Facebook pages. Mr. Speaker, on their behalf also, I want to thank the Minister of Agriculture and Marine Resources for enabling our constituency office to be able to distribute throughout the constituency for persons who would have expressed an interest those backyard farming kits. Constituents are excited. Constituents have embraced the challenge, and I'm looking forward to the harvest time. Mr. Speaker, I want to say to the constituents in the southern portion, Marshall Road, we are aware of the challenge of flooding, even when it's prized. And I want them to know that the government is embarking on a pilot program to address that very same vexing situation throughout New Providence. And I'm satisfied that as we move forward, Southern Shores, particularly Marshall Road and Misty Gardens, will not be left out. Mr. Speaker, I want to join the member for Kalani as he would have recognized and thanked the staff of the Ministry and Department of Social Services for their continued hard work in this pandemic, ensuring that we do our best to render assistance to those who are in need. Mr. Speaker, I rise here this morning to give a brief communication on several national observances. I'm thankful for the opportunity, Mr. Speaker, to give a brief intervention on 6 significant annual observances, namely International Men's Day, which will be celebrated on the 19th of November, Universal Children's Day, that will be celebrated on the 20th of November, International Day to End Violence Against Women and Girls, which will be celebrated on the 25th of November, National Observance of the Women's Suffrage Movement, which will be celebrated on the 26th of November, the International Campaign of 16 Days of Activism to End Violence Against Women, Girls, and Children, which will be celebrated between the 25th of November to the 10th of December. And finally, Human Rights Day, which will be celebrated on the 10th of December. Mr. Speaker, today I salute the members of the International Men's Day Committee, Zonta, the National Women Advisory Council, the Crisis Center, the Caribbean Institute for Women in Leadership, the National Congress of Trade Unions of the Bahamas, and all NGO partners and the staff of the Ministry of Social Services and Urban Development, including the Department of Gender and Family. Mr. Speaker, I also take this opportunity to thank the Prime Minister, the Most Honorable Dr. Hubert A. Minnis, for the issuance of 3 proclamations declaring these observances, beginning with International Men's Day on the 19th. I bring greetings, Mr. Speaker, to men and boys throughout the Commonwealth of the Bahamas and express my sincere appreciation to the Department of Gender and Family Affairs, the Male Desk, and the International Men's Day Bahamas Committee, who have made the activities for the International Men's Day 2020 possible. This year's theme, Men's Health and Well-Being, is timely and very relevant to men and boys of the Bahamas during this unprecedented and extraordinary global pandemic. It is imperative that all of us men and young boys position and keep ourselves healthy so that we will be able to protect our families. I'm grateful for the various partnerships with public and private agencies associated with health and well-being, and the many programs organized to hold public discussions on issues such as maintaining good health, improving gender relations, promoting gender equality, highlighting positive role models, and discrimination against men and boys, as well as celebrating their achievements and contributions to family and the community as a whole. I'm especially pleased to partner with my cabinet colleague, the Minister of Youth, the good member for Seabreeze, as the Ministry of Youth has provided permission for the unveiling of the Men's Day logo and the mural on the National Stadium wall, as well as the facilitation of the awards ceremony to honor several of our men who are from various island communities throughout the Bahamas for the continued work in their respective island communities. I encourage all Bahamians, especially men and boys, to participate virtually in the activities that we as a country can all be healthy. I also want to take this opportunity, Mr. Speaker. I'm familiar and very close to a group of men who claim to seek out good men and make them better, Mr. Speaker. As I stand here, I challenge those men to step up, step out, and be a part of these activities relative to International Men's Day. Mr. Speaker, Universal Children's Day is observed annually by the United Nations on the 20th of November. I'm pleased to say that this day has been observed by my ministry since 2012 with the National Child Protection Council and the Urban Renewal Unit in partnership with the Department of Social Services being the primary entities bringing awareness to this important day. The purpose of Universal Children's Day is to bring heightened awareness to the Convention on the Rights of the Child, which was ratified by the Bahamas in 1991. The overarching theme of the convention focuses on the best interests of the child. The 54 articles that it contains explains that the child's interests must be taken into consideration in every situation that involves the child. Children, Mr. Speaker, have a right to be provided and cared for, to be free from abuse or neglect, and to be heard in matters that affect them. Mr. Speaker, I must repeat that last line. Children have a right to be heard in matters that affect them. I know some of us of my age and older would recall when the mantra would have been, children are to be seen and not heard. But Mr. Speaker, I'm here to tell this House and the Bahamas that there has been a paradigm shift as a result of our ratifying the Rights of the Child Convention in 1991. I'm here to tell this House and the Bahamas that children have a right to be heard and that we as parents must encourage that right and ensure that that right is coupled with the responsibility of telling the truth when they seek to be heard. Mr. Speaker, this year's theme, investing in our future, means investing in our children, encourages us to re-examine the way we have been relating to children, as it is no easy task. Why? Because to invest in something means to commit to it in order to gain a return, to spend or devote for future advantage or benefit, to devote morally or psychologically as to a purpose, to endow with authority or power. The National Child Protection Council developed the I Got a Right campaign 6 years ago to teach children about their rights under the Convention on the Rights of the Child. This was achieved each year by conducting campaigns at various schools on Universal Children's Day. To date, Mr. Speaker, over 7,000 students have been exposed to this campaign. And I want to pause to acknowledge the contribution and participation of the Royal Bahamas Police Force that has always been a part of this campaign. Mr. Speaker, I turn to the observance of the women's suffrage movement. I extend thanks to my fellow women parliamentarians for supporting the Department of Gender and Family in several pre-recordings relative to the national observance of the women's suffrage movement. It has been 58 years since women first voted on the 26th of November, 1962. Women in the Bahamas were aware of the enfranchisement of women in different parts of the world, including women in Canada in 1920, the United States in 1920, Great Britain in 1928, and from 1944 to 1950, women in the English-speaking Caribbean, including Jamaica, Trinidad, and Barbados. Meanwhile, here in the Bahamas, thousands of women of the great improved, benevolent, and protective order of elks of the world, and I'm sure joined by the women of the Order of Eastern Stars, advocated for the voices and votes of women to be counted. 58 years later, women continue to advocate for change in areas that concern them. Among them are an increase in laws and equal protections against discrimination, rape, abuse, and violence against women, increased health and social protections for women and children. These priorities will only be accomplished through a concerted effort by all. Mr. Speaker, I will now highlight International campaign of 16 days of activism to end violence against women and children from the period of the 25th of November to December 10th. We are all invited, Mr. Speaker, to join Zonta Bahamas as they lead 16 days of activism to end violence against women, as declared by the United Nations and is being celebrated in almost 200 countries around the world. Orange is the color being used to reflect on ways and reasons why we need to collectively end all forms of physical, psychological, economic, and even cyber violence against women, girls, and each other. The dates for the campaign were chosen to link violence against women and human rights and emphasize that gender-based violence against women is a violation of human rights. The 16 Days campaign is an organizing strategy for individuals, communities, schools, churches, government, private sector, and civil society groups around the world to call for the elimination of all forms of gender-based violence against women and girls. Mr. Speaker, violence against women and girls is one of the most widespread, persistent, and devastating human rights violations in our world today, and remains largely unreported due to impunity, silence, stigma, and the shame surrounding it. Mr. Speaker, I invite Bahamians and residents alike to break the silence, see something, say something, do something. I know that I have the support of my colleague, the good member for Mount Moriah, Minister for National Security, and his team of law enforcement agents to do their part. But they have to be told something. So those who see something, hear something, got to say something in order for them to do something. Today, Mr. Speaker, I encourage the Bahamian public to wear something orange. Orange ribbons, scarves, shoes, socks, orange accessories each day until December 10th, which is the International Human Rights Day. Mr. Speaker, I would be remiss to be talking about women and their concerns and their achievements and not recognize a giant among them who has taken our Bahamian flag around the world in this very same advocacy. I want to congratulate, Mr. Speaker, on behalf of the ministry, the Department of Gender Affairs, the government, and people of the Bahamas, Marion Bethel, on her re-election. On her re-election to CEDAW, which is the Committee on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women. It would have been 2 years ago I had the privilege to lead a delegation to Switzerland, to the UN. And no, we would have gone to Switzerland first. Yes. And so we would have been grilled, Mr. Speaker, with a number of what appeared to be difficult questions on what we here in the Bahamas were doing to ensure that discrimination against women is highlighted, sensitized, and eliminated. And in the midst of that, Mr. Speaker, there was great comfort knowing that the Bahamas flag was among the 23 experts doing the evaluation. I was satisfied, even though the questions were difficult and sometimes uncomfortable, that we would have gotten a fair shake. Ms. Marion's election, Mr. Speaker, is evidence of the Bahamas continuing to punch beyond its weight. When you consider, Mr. Speaker, the number of small island development states and the number of votes that we have, which is minimal compared to the developed states, for them to express that confidence in her, to re-elect her, is evidence that she is performing, that she is competent, and she is of value. So I want to thank all the nations that would have voted for her, especially our CARICOM sisters and brothers. And I also want to join the Minister and Ministry of Foreign Affairs for an excellent campaign. Go Team Bahamas. Mr. Speaker, as I take my seat, I must confess that I came here this morning with the view of asking permission for me to wear my orange tie in this house. But as I reflected and contemplated, I realized it would be horrible for me to stand out and not invite my parliamentary colleagues to join in with me and participate in this very important venture of supporting the 16 days of activism. So, Mr. Speaker, I hope I'm not putting you on the spot by asking publicly if you would grant permission for all members of this House to wear something orange on Wednesday, the 25th of November, when this House meets, which will be the beginning of the 16 days of activism. Mr. Speaker, while I'm on my feet, I want to invite the members of the public, corporate citizens everywhere to support Zonta with their T-shirt day every Friday, T-shirt day, and I'm satisfied that government agencies will lead by example. The T-shirt this year says, "Staying COVID-19 and domestic violence free. Stop violence against women." The T-shirt by itself is a mere $15, but the T-shirt and the mask, Mr. Speaker, is a small $25. Mr. Speaker, I encourage Bahamians and residents everywhere to support all of the activities that I would have mentioned. There is one common thread in them all, Mr. Speaker. Simply a question of respect. If we have respect for and toward each other, there wouldn't be a question of who's abusing who or who's violating whose rights. Mr. Speaker, my devotions remind me of the message given on the Sermon of the Mount. Simple, Mr. Speaker. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Mr. Speaker, may God continue to bless all of our persons involved in these activities as God continues to bless the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Honorable Member. Order that the communication be brought up. Order that the communication do lie on the table. Further statements and communications by ministers. Chair recognizes the Honorable Member for Bamboo.
Mr. Speaker, there are no further statements and communications by ministers.
Communications by the clerk. Messages from the Governor General. Messages from the Senate. Honorable members, I have several messages from the Senate. The Honorable Senate acquaints the Honorable House of Assembly that they have agreed to the following resolution, being number 55, dated the 23rd of September, 2020, from the Honorable House of Assembly. That is message number 56 from the Senate. Message number 57 from the Senate. The Honorable Senate acquaints the Honorable House of Assembly that they have passed the following bill, accompanying message number 56, dated the 23rd of September, 2020, from the Honorable House of Assembly. A bill for an act to amend the Register of Beneficial Ownership Act. Message number 58. The Honorable Senate acquaints the Honorable House of Assembly that they have agreed to the following resolution accompanying message number 58, dated the 26th of October, 2020, from the Honorable House of Assembly. Message number 59. The Honorable Senate acquaints the Honorable House of Assembly that they have passed the following bill accompanying message number 57, dated the 30th of September, 2020, from the Honorable House of Assembly. A bill for an act to amend the Juries Act. And finally, message number 60, the Honorable Senate acquaints the Honorable House of Assembly that they have passed the following bill, accompanying message number 59, dated the 4th of November 2020, from the Honorable House of Assembly. A bill for an act to regulate the issuance, sale, and trade of digital assets in or from within the Bahamas. And secondly, a bill for an act to repeal and replace the Financial and Corporate Service Providers Act to modernize the law regulating non-bank financial and corporate services in the Bahamas and for connected purposes. And now order that the messages from the Senate to lie on the table. Motions for leave of absence, leave to resign seat, and new writs. Presentations of petitions. Presentations of reports of committees. Adoption of reports of committees. First reading of bills. The chair recognizes the honorable member for Marco City.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I beg leave to introduce and have read for the first time the Fisheries Bill 2020, a bill for an act to provide for the regulation of the fisheries resources of the Bahamas, to provide for the long-term conservation, management, and sustainable development of fisheries resources by the application of the precautionary and ecosystem approaches to enhance the livelihood of communities dependent on fishing and to meet the needs of future generations, to provide for licensing of commercial fishers and fishing vessels, to deter, prevent, and eliminate illegal, unreported, and unregulated fishing in Bahamian fisheries waters, to repeal the Fisheries Resources, Jurisdiction and Conservation Act 1977, and for connected purposes.
Thank you, honorable member. Honorable members, it hasn't been seconded yet. I call on the member for Naughty Lutra II. Honorable members, order that the bill be brought up. Order that the bill do lie on the table. Honorable members, it has been moved and seconded that the following bill be read for the first time. A bill for an act to provide for the regulation of the fisheries resources of the Bahamas, to provide for the long-term conservation, management, and sustainable development of fishery resources by the application of the precautionary and ecosystem approaches to enhance the livelihood of communities dependent on fishing and to meet the needs of future generations, to provide for licensing of commercial fishers and fishing vessels, to deter unregulated fishing in the Bahamas, in the Bahamian fisheries water, to repeal the Fisheries Resources Jurisdiction and Conservation Act of 1977, and for connected purposes. As many as are in favor will remain seated. Those who oppose will stand. Order that the bill be read for the first time.
A bill for an act to provide for the regulation of the fisheries resources of the Bahamas, to provide for the long-term conservation, management, and sustainable development of fishery resources by the application of the precautionary and ecosystem approaches to enhance the livelihood of communities dependent on fishing and to meet the needs of future generations, to provide for licensing of commercial fishers and fishing vessels, to deter, prevent, and eliminate illegal, unreported, and unregulated fishing in the Bahamian fisheries waters, to repeal the Fisheries Resources Jurisdiction and Conservation Act 1977 and for connected purposes.
Further first reading of bills. Chair recognizes the honorable member for Yamacraw.
May it please you, Mr. Speaker. I rise and beg leave to introduce and have read for the first time a bill for an act to amend the Immigration Act. And again, Mr. Speaker, the member from what is it?
Order that the bill be brought up.
And again, if
Is
you
there a
allow
second
me,
now?
Mr. Speaker. Okay. 1 second.
Yeah. Honorable member for Northern Lutra. Thank you, honorable member. Honorable members, it has been moved and seconded that the following bill be read for the first time. A bill for an act to amend the Immigration Act. As many as are in favor will remain seated, those who oppose will stand. Order that the bill be read for the first time.
Bill for an act to amend the Immigration Act.
First reading of bills. The chair recognizes the honorable member for Yamacraw.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I rise and beg leave to introduce and have read for the first time a copy of the following: a bill for an act to amend the Penal Code.
Order that the bill be brought up.
Just a copy of that.
Is there a second now? Honorable members, it has been moved and seconded that the following bill be read for the first time. A bill for an act to amend the Penal Code. As many as are in favor will remain seated. Those who oppose will stand. Order that the bill be read for the first time.
A bill for an act to amend the Penal Code.
Further first reading of bills. Chair recognizes the honorable member for Bamberg Town.
Mr. Speaker, there are no further first readings.
Thank you, honorable member. Second reading and committal of bills. The chair recognizes the honorable member for Mount Moriah.
Morning, Speaker, Parliamentary colleagues. Speaker, for I commend this debate to propose two very important bills. I think it's timely and certainly important for me just briefly to speak on a few connected issues. And to pay my respects, Mr. Speaker, to all of those members in law enforcement who has been serving, who would have left this earth within the last few months. I've had the opportunity to speak to any number of family members. Mr. Speaker, we're living in a time right now, because of COVID, where we all are faced with our own challenges and adversities. And sometimes, because we're so caught up in our own world, we tend to miss, sometimes forget, that those around us too are suffering. And so to the family of all of those law enforcement officers who would have left us, whether it was due to COVID or due to some other illness, I say to you all, as the minister with responsibility for national security, that we pray for you and your family as you go through this year period of bereavement. To speak, I too was impacted by death. Both my father and my father-in-law passed on the same day. That was October 9th. And my father, who was a serving police officer, served some 32 years in the Royal Bahamas Police Force. And my father-in-law, who also gave service to this country as a superintendent for the Water and Sewage Department, who would have served some 49 years and was enduring a very long illness before he passed. And so I pray God for their souls. And it would be remiss of me too, Mr. Speaker, if I failed to mention the former minister who at some time had responsibility for national security, Dal Rowe, who himself left this earth. I had come to know former Minister Rowe. We developed a friendship, and so I pray for his family. I pray that God will continue to guide them and bless them and cover them as they go through this period of bereavement. I also pray for those families within my constituency, the constituency of Mount Moriah, Yellow Elder Gardens, Millennium Gardens, Stapleton Gardens, and throughout the Commonwealth of the Bahamas, who at this time are going through their own challenges. We must be there for one another, Mr. Speaker, in times like this. So it brings me to my next point, Mr. Speaker. Recently, the Prime Minister would have made a proclamation for the We Are One campaign under the umbrella of the National Neighborhood Watch Council. This council, Mr. Speaker, consists of some 150 groups throughout the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. Our Prime Minister had the opportunity this week on Monday to open this program. And I must say, Mr. Speaker, I congratulate those hard-working persons at the Ministry of National Security, Royal Bahamas Police Force, the co-chairs who were civilians, their executive team, the presidents of all of these associations, and the people, the residents, who have all banded together to make this program, the NNWC program, one of the most vibrant programs within the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. And Michelle Lewis and Laquelle Johnson, those persons who are behind the organization of the We Are One campaign. This campaign came about as a result of Shelley Lewis and others recognizing that, you know, there is so much hurting going on in our nation. You turn on the radio, the television, all you hear is complaints. But we need more people, Mr. Speaker, at this time to stand up and to be counted. And instead, to be the ones who are out there going against the grain, so to speak. But to take our collective energies and put it towards healing this nation and bringing this nation together. That's what we need more of. a lot of what you see in terms of and in relation to these orders are for our safety, the safety of every Bahamian. This is not about our Prime Minister. This is not about any one individual. This is about us taking and being responsible as individuals, first and foremost, and as Bahamians collectively. If we fail to recognize that we have a responsibility, Mr. Speaker, first individually to ourselves and to our families, we will miss the bigger picture. So it's incumbent upon us, for our own good, the good of our communities, and by extension, the good of our nation, to recognize that we are in no ordinary time. We're in a time where if we neglect our roles and responsibilities, we will cause irreparable damage to our nation and its future. And so we all must stand up to be counted. And so I say kudos to those persons within the NNWC and to ask the entire Bahamas to join with them as we celebrate life and as we reach out to every home, to every community throughout this country to help those most in need. So, Mr. Speaker, it's with that now that I rise in this honorable House to lay the framework for a compendium of amendment bills of 2020 for both the Department of Corrections and the Royal Bahamas Defense Force. And I am humbled, Mr. Speaker, to be here today to do just that. These bills, Mr. Speaker, the amendments to these bills obviously will impact the regulations as it relates to the Defense Force in connection with the reserves, with officers. It also impact regulations in relation to pensions and gratuities, as well as regulations in relation to enlistment. We're seeking to bring parity to our law enforcement agencies.
Honorable member, which one of the bills will be your principal bill? Your lead.
I will start first with the Defense Force bill, followed by the corrections bill, followed by the Defense Force bill, Mr. Speaker.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you, honorable member.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, according to Mahatma Gandhi, the best way to find yourself is to lose yourself in the service of others. It is a truth I have always believed and one which I strive to live daily. It is also one that the men and women in law enforcement, and today I speak about the Bahamas Department of Corrections and the Royal Bahamas Defense Force, live every day as they adorn their uniforms and provide protective and rehabilitative service to the people of our nation. Mr. Speaker, I am grateful for the Almighty Father's continued blessing and the support of my family and the great people of the constituency of Mount Moriah, all of whom continue to repose their trust in me. I would like to extend warm wishes to our F&M Council of Mount Moriah and to the associations of Stapleton Gardens, Millennium Gardens, and Yellow Elder Gardens for their continued hard work and support to make a difference within their respective communities. On a daily basis, Mr. Speaker, I live with the weight of my sworn obligation as I discharge the duties and responsibilities given to me by the Honorable Member for Killarney, the Most Honorable Prime Minister. Therefore, I am still honored to lead the Ministry of National Security and its hard-working staff. I'm also honored to represent the agencies under my remit on behalf of the people of this nation. I thank each of you for your continued commitment to service to our nation. The agencies I speak of are inclusive of the Parliamentary Registration Department and the brave men and women in law enforcement. Your time, talent, and treasure offered in service to your country are much appreciated. Mr. Speaker, I shall begin with the former, the Department of Correctional Services. Mr. Speaker, correctional facilities inclusive of jails and prisons are used to oversee incarcerated populations that consist of persons who have been arrested and are awaiting trial or who have been sentenced to serve time. Consequently, incarcerated populations often reflect the last component in the criminal justice sector and are often overlooked by most in society. Secured and functional correctional institutions are crucial to our justice system and play an effective role against crime. Whether the incarcerated are convicted or are awaiting trial, the public can be assured that such individuals are housed in humane environments and rehabilitative programs are readily available. Mr. Speaker, correctional officers are engaged in a demanding job in which they often have little control with reference to scheduling, the number of incarcerated persons they have to supervise on a daily basis, the work environment itself. In addition to the ongoing administrative, operational, and infrastructural upgrades to the correctional facility, a long outstanding issue has been the lack of parity, Mr. Speaker, with reference to the age limit for retirement of subordinate correctional officers. Today, Mr. Speaker, I will put forward minor but significant and impactful amendments to the Correctional Services Act. These changes are a part of our government's institutional reform and continued advancement for a more modern correctional facility. Mr. Speaker, this bill will amend the Correctional Services Act of 2014, number 8 of the third schedule, so as to extend the retirement age of subordinate correctional officers, while also addressing relatable matters. The third schedule of the Principal Act addresses terms and conditions of employment, particularly for subordinate correctional officers. Paragraph 1, subparagraph 2 of the Principal Act will be amended by deletion of the word 50 and substituted for the word 55. To date, this would reflect some 3% of the department's career officers who are between the ages of 50 and 54. Concurrently, in subparagraph 3A of the Principal Act, the word 10 will be deleted and substituted for the word 5. Accordingly, Mr. Speaker, this means that a subordinate correctional officer, after having served 30 years, may be allowed to continue to provide service from year to year for a period not exceeding 5 years, as opposed to the previous 10 years. To complement subparagraph 2 and subparagraph 3A, an amendment will also be made to subparagraph 3B, in which the word 50 will be deleted and replaced by the word 55. Of course, all of the aforesaid will be dependent on an individual's physical ability to re-engage and the Commissioner's recommendation that the officer is a suitable person for re-engagement. Mr. Speaker, the increase in retirement age for correctional officer now brings the much needed parity among law enforcement agencies in the country. This now makes pensions equitable, ensures stability, and sustainability of law enforcement personnel over a long term. It also allows for the continued human capital investment from officers who are still able to contribute significantly their knowledge and skills to the institution itself. Mr. Speaker, this also means that the agency will not risk losing 22% of its officers between the ages of 40 and 50 years in the next few years due to previous legal mandatory retirement age. Today's small amendments to the Principal Act is a pivotal step to assist in reducing the level of institutional knowledge that may have been lost with the departure of skilled employees whom are still capable of making meaningful contribution to the service to the institution and their country as a whole. Mr. Speaker, to conclude, the amendments to Section 1 of the third schedule, subparagraph 5, will be inserted immediately after subparagraph 4. The new subparagraph shall read, the pension of every subordinate correctional officer who engages with the Department of Correctional Services shall be suspended during the period of re-engagement and reinstated upon the completion of his or her retirement, or of his or her re-engagement. As you are now aware, this government pledged and continue to demonstrate its ability to lead in an equal, equitable, and transparent manner. Immediately after paragraph 1, the following new paragraph, to be known as 1A, will be inserted and entitled Compulsory Retirement of Officers Above the Rank of Sergeant. It will read as follows. Every officer in the Department of Correctional Services other than an officer referred to in subparagraph 2 and 3 of paragraph 1 of the third schedule shall, upon attaining 60 years of age or rendering 40 years of service, whichever is soonest, retire. Again, this simple amendment brings the much needed parity for correctional officers with their counterparts in the Royal Bahamas Police and Defense Force. Mr. Speaker, the third amendment will reflect the transitional process for subordinate correctional officers. Those officers whom are scheduled to retire from the Department of Correctional Services should, within the first 6 months of the date of the coming into force of this act, and wish to apply for re-engagement under paragraph 1(3) of the third schedule, should apply in writing to the Commissioner of Corrections no less than 6 months prior to the date that the said officer is due to retire. This new amendment shall apply to any person who on the date of the coming into force of this act is a subordinate correctional officer. Mr. Speaker, globally, pensions are needed in society to house offenders of laws. Prison, correction. The Bahamas Department of Correctional Services is tasked with the detention and rehabilitation of inmates with the view that they will be integrated in the Bahamian society. Correctional officers play a crucial role in overseeing the incarcerated population in the Bahamas Department of Correctional Services. They are men and women whom are often underappreciated compared to other members of law enforcement. Given that they work behind prison walls and they are unseen by the public, but they work hard. And this government is committed to addressing their concerns. And this is only the beginning, Mr. Speaker. There are more to come. After having served many years in this profession, our government is committed to assisting those who serve their country and serve their country well. According to researchers, there are 4 cornerstones to retirement. which include activity, financial, emotional, physical steps. Those 4 steps are not sequential, but are interconnected and are heavily dependent on adequate financial support. Today's amendments, though few, have far-reaching outcomes for our correctional officers. And I am proud that our government has finally sought to do what others have failed to do. Mr. Speaker, I now turn to the Royal Bahamas Defense Force. Mr. Speaker, let me lay the framework for the Royal Bahamas Defense Force Amendment Bill. And as was noted, coming into force of this bill to enact, there will be changes to the regulations in relation to reserve serving officers, pensions and gratuities, as well as to regular enlistment and service. And so, Mr. Speaker, in recent times, members of the Royal Bahamas Defense Force have been called upon, more so than ever before, to perform many duties. The evolving roles and responsibilities of safety and security have expanded, and so has the mandate of the Royal Bahamas Defense Force. The agency's human capital continues to become more highly skilled and flexible, which is capable of transitioning from border security and peacekeeping operations to humanitarian relief. Mr. Speaker, the continued fight against drugs and arms smuggling and illegal migration and poaching remains. In addition, the emergence of new security challenges such as terrorism and the rise in cybercrime have resulted in the refocus of the Royal Bahamas Defense Force's role on internal as well as external security matters. Mr. Speaker, this minister-led administration is once again answering the clarion call to ensure that those serving their country are being utilized to their maximum potential, especially in these times of uncertainty. The Defense Force Amendment Bill 2020 will amend the Defense Force Act, Chapter 2011. Specifically, the bill will amend Section 17 of Part 4 of the Principal Act, known as Terms of Enlistment, by deleting the words 25 and replacing it with the word 30. By extending the enlistment age of new entrants, the Defense Force is increasing its human capital by attracting a pool of more mature and qualified individuals. In addition, the maturity level due to life experiences will greatly benefit this organization. Researchers contend that more seasoned employees have greater interpersonal skills and team building traits, which serves to improve organizational practices and productivity. Mr. Speaker, the relatable matters addressed in the bill will repeal and replace Section 18 of the Principal Act, which addresses re-engagement and continuation of service. As such, the retirement age of warrant officers and Marines of the regular force will now be extended from age 55 to 60 years or 40 years of service, whichever is earlier. Any Marine whom Section 8 applies will have a 6-month period from the date of his or her retirement to reapply for re-engagement. These simple amendments, yet profound, will resolve the issues of warrant officers and Marines having to leave the service while still able to contribute significantly to protecting and serving their country. Mr. Speaker, let me pause here for a second. When I was given the responsibility, Mr. Speaker, by the Most Honorable Prime Minister to oversee the Ministry of National Security. The Defense Force is one of the principal agencies under that remit. And as we were doing our assessment of the agency, what I discovered was that we were still nearing the end of the Sandy Bottom engagement, in which this government government of the Bahamas would have invested some $300+ million in. And one of the things that disheartened me when I inquired from the then Commodore was the status of their engineering department was significantly depleted and almost non-existent. And you're going to spend all of these monies investing in boats, investing in technology, but you have no capacity or capability to maintain. This was frightening, very disheartening, very upsetting. So one of the things that this government has embarked upon, and we're working with consultants now, is to redefine the role of the Defense Force. Mr. Speaker, we will never fight a war. So there's no need for us to put all of our time and energy into military, right? While that has its place, our focus should be more on protecting our territorial borders from poachers and illegal migrants, drug smuggling, and so forth. But more importantly, Mr. Speaker, is we should be able to transform this agency into an agency that could respond to our most dire needs, especially in times of global warming and when we're seeing a greater frequency of hurricanes, and our ability to respond to these, to climate change, and our ability to respond to these disasters in a very, very organized and a professional manner, because we're going to need it. And Dorian was a clear example of that. And so that is what this government is doing, and we're working now on reshaping the Defense Force so that it would be able to respond to our most critical needs. But in order for us to get there, we must address these deficits. So you can't have boats, but you have no engineering department. So what we're seeking to do here, therefore, Mr. Speaker, is through research, determine what the challenges are and to bring fixes to those challenges. That's all I'm saying. And so you'll be hearing more about that as we move forward. But Mr. Speaker, I would like to make it clear that the extension of the retirement age from 55 to 60 will not affect the current serving and enlisted members of the Defense Force. This is due to a doctrine and law that the legislation cannot take away a vested right. Members of the Defense Force, up to date, the doctrine says members of the Defense Force, up to date of assenting of the amendments, will still be able to retire at 55 years if they so desire, or they can apply to benefit from that extension. And I repeat, I would like to make it clear that the extension of the retirement age from 55 to 60 years will not affect the current serving enlisted members of the Royal Bahamas Defense Force. This is due to a doctrine and law that a legislation cannot take away a vested right. Members of the Defense Force, up to date of assenting of the amendments, will be able to retire at age 55 if they so desire, or they can apply to benefit from this extension. Mr. Speaker, while personnel have the option to retire or remain active on the force, it is the latter option that will ensure the sustainability of the Royal Bahamas Defense Force, as in the case of the Bahamas Department of Corrections. In order for the Defense Force to be most effective in its decentralization program, and we're moving assiduously toward that, under the program, the Defense Force continues to establish outposts in the Southern Bahamas, which means that an adequate personnel with knowledge, skill, and experience will be more important. And so we cannot, Mr. Speaker, afford this continued brain drain, especially of the officers, the Marines, and the petty officers who have experience to share. Very critical, Mr. Speaker, very critical. Our government is making the necessary investment in technology and supportive legislation, therefore. The human capital has to be readily available to complement the same. Mr. Speaker, an audit of the Defense Force highlighted that approximately 130 persons, or 8.6%, would have been forced to retire within the last 10 years due to the mandatory legal retirement age requirement. The recent series of hurricanes, including Dorian and Matthew, have all shed light on the need for qualified and experienced personnel who are able to respond in a timely manner to render aid or provide infrastructural expertise to assist those most in need. With the recent hurricanes, the agency didn't have a full complement of personnel to render, competent personnel and experienced personnel to render a number of critical services due to forced retirements. Dorian was unprecedented, Mr. Speaker, and it taught us a lesson. But this government recognized even prior to where we were and what we needed to do to address the deficit. So consequently, Mr. Speaker, we anticipate that there will be a continuous increase in the number of hurricanes and other weather-related disasters and other disasters, thereby increasing the demands on the Defense Forces personnel locally and throughout the region. Remember the services and support that we gave to our sister nation in Dominica. Today's amendment will ensure that the agency and by extension our nation has the human capital capacity with the necessary knowledge and skills to be called to action when needed the most. Mr. Speaker, the amendments to the Principal Act of the Defense Force requires changes to the Defense Force pension, and we talk about the gratuities regulations which will come. And these reforms are necessary to bring conformity with amendments to the Principal Act. To align relatable policies, the Defense Force bill requires a repeal and replacement of Regulation 3 of the Principal Regulation. This repeal addresses the calculation of pensions for Marines and warrant officers completing 30 years of service. And those who have not completed 30 years of service, which is in relations to the persons providing service in respect of which his or her benefits are payable under the relevant retirement preventions under this Act. So, Mr. Speaker, for warrant officers or Marines with less than 30 years of service and an attainment of 60 years, the following will apply, which would be a person may receive a pension of 1/600 of the amount of his or her pensionable emoluments for each completed month of reckonable service. B, if his or her service is 30 years, he or she may receive 1/2 of the amount of his pensionable emoluments. Or C, if his or her service exceeds 30 years, he or she may receive 1/720th of his or her pensionable emoluments for each completed month of his or her reckonable service. It should be noted that a pension granted under this regulation should not exceed 2/3 of the individual's highest pensionable emolument. Mr. Speaker, under the replacement of Regulation 3 of the Principal Regulation, subsection 3, subsection 2 requires any person at the commencement of this regulation to be allowed to exercise no less than 6 months before the date on which he or she is set to retire, the option to receive all grants and payments to him or her in relations to pensions benefits before the commencement of this regulation or the law enforced immediately after such commencement. In essence, no serving member in the regular force will be disenfranchised by the new amendments to the Defense Principal Act or the Principal Pensions and Gratuity Regulations. Section 3, subsection 3, makes provisions for those serving members in the regular force who fail to adhere to the specified time, and so much so that they will still be allowed to receive their grants and pensions, payment of pension, for which they are entitled, notwithstanding the repeal of those provisions by the new provisions which have been laid. Complementary, subsection 4, therefore, for the purpose of subsection 2, addresses grants and payment options for enlisted personnel in the regular force. This new addition will allow serving members the opportunity to document their choice in writing to the competent authority. Mr. Speaker, the amendments to the regulations which will be forthcoming requires the assertion of a new regulation immediately after Regulation 3, to be known as 3A, into the principal regulation. The new regulations shall be entitled Suspensions of Pensions During Re-engagement. This means that the pension of all warrant officers and Marines will be suspended during their period of re-engagement and reinstated upon the completion of their re-engagement. An amendment is also being made to the Regulation 8, paragraph 1B of the principal regulation by deleting the word 25 and substituting the word 30. The same will be applied to paragraph 1C by deleting the word 25 and substituting the word 30. This amendment is designed to complement the changes made by the Principal Act relating to increasing the enlistment age of candidates. An amendment is also required and will be forthcoming for Regulations 11 of the Principal Regulations by inserting immediately after the word representative the following: or any person designated under oath by such warrant officer or Marine. Mr. Speaker, this simple insertion has significant meaning to serving regular members of the Defense Force. Unlike before, prior to this amendment, a warrant officer or Marine who died without leaving a will would have required his estate to approach the Supreme Court in order to administrate on the estate if his or her loved ones desired benefits from his or her gratuities and or vacation entitlements. This amendment will put an end to the former and allow whom was nominated by that warrant officer or that Marine to benefit directly. In addition, Mr. Speaker, it is another step in bringing about parity among law enforcement agencies. They all give service to the country. Mr. Speaker, today's contribution will amend to the will amend to the Defense Force, and we talk about the reserves too, the regulations of 2020, and seeking to ensure equity among the career personnel of the Royal Bahamas Defense Force. Consideration was given also to the reserves, and we will shortly amend the Regulation 7 of the principal regulations in paragraph 2 by deleting the word 50, fifth, and substituting the word 60th. In addition, Mr. Speaker, an amendment is being made to the first schedule of the principal regulation in paragraph 4 under the heading General Conditions of Engagement by deleting the word 55th and substituting it with 60. So as you heard, Mr. Speaker, we have not forgotten to include the reserve personnel in this exercise, as they too play an important role in advancing the mandate of the Royal Bahamas Defense Force and by extension, the safety and security of the people of our nation. Mr. Speaker, officers and Marines of the Defense Force represent the men and women that form one part of several different entities that is collectively responsible for protecting our territorial sovereignty and our safety and security. The increase in the retirement age of warrant officers and Marines now brings parity among all law enforcement agencies. What I would have spoken to earlier in respect to the Bahamas Department of Corrections. The pensions of serving members of the Defense Force are both equitable and more sustainable over the long term. The amendments laid before this Honorable House, Mr. Speaker, also supports transparency for the Defense Force. The retention of institutional knowledge and or institutional memory is an important attribute in the recruitment and retention of serving members. One of the greater threats is quantifying and replacing such employees. In addition, the more important statistic involves the level of capacity of knowledge that people leaving possess. Not all people, but a lot of them. And that's who we want to focus on, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, allow me to end as I've started. Let it be known that I fully support the Correctional Service and propose the Correctional Service Amendment Bill 2020, as it will serve to bring parity for correctional officers to match that of their other law enforcement counterparts. I also fully support the Defense Amendment Bill 2020 and all of the regulations to come, Mr. Speaker, as these are important as our government seeks not only to bring parity, but respectability and the highest level of professionalism to these frontline agencies that are so important to us, the people of this nation, especially during a time as this. And so it gives me great pleasure, Mr. Speaker, to stand and propose the amendments to these two significant bills. And before I take my seat, I thank God for these law enforcement agencies, and may God bless them and their families as they continue to give professional service. And may God bless the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. Thank you.
Thank you, Honorable Member. Is there a seconder? Chair recognizes the Honorable Member for North Abaco.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I rise to second the amendments proposed by the government of the Bahamas through the Minister of National Security, as they are critical to the lives of the Marines and officers of the prison and their families, whom they will positively impact, but also because they are very essential to the institutions in which these officers serve. But before I continue, please permit me to add my voice of approbation to that of the Minister of Social Services in congratulating Ms. Marian Bethel on her re-election to the United Nations Committee on the Elimination of Discrimination Against Women, CEDAW. Mr. Speaker, we at the Ministries of Foreign Affairs and Social Services are very happy and proud of Ms. Bethel, who's a very respected voice in the international community and on the committee as it relates to the affairs of women. I also wish to congratulate our officers for putting on a stellar campaign to have Ms. Bethel re-elected. And, you know, Mr. Speaker, she garnered, the Minister of Social Services alluded to it, but we're advised that she garnered the second highest number of votes to those elected to the committee. We also use this opportunity as Minister of Foreign Affairs to thank CARICOM sister states for their overwhelming support of Ms. Bethel. Now, Minister, before I dive into what I'm going to do here, I'd like for you to understand how very essential what you just said concerning the reshaping, your strategic plan to reshape the Defense Force is. You know, the Defense Force was established through the work of the former Prime Minister, Sir Lyndon Finley. And I recommend all young officers when they join the Defense Force that they read his memoirs, which will tell you precisely what the Defense Force was intended to be. And I'll just, if you will indulge me, Mr. Speaker, in 1975, the former Prime Minister indicated that he envisioned a force which will not only safeguard our sovereignty and independence, but will also rescue lives at sea. A force which not only will keep our poachers and smugglers, keep out poachers and smugglers, but will man our lighthouses, watch our sea lanes. A force which not only will help to keep the peace, as they're doing today, but will also supply food and emergency relief to an island community ravaged by a disastrous hurricane, or take much needed medical services to isolated communities. A force which not only will exemplify discipline, but will also exemplify the same by example in our communities, where they may help to repair schools, roads, and drains. In other words, I see a People's Defense Force which fits totally within our philosophy of development. It's dedicated to the progress with self-reliance and further helps us to tighten up and toughen up. You know, this clearly explicates your position and the way that you wish to strategically in our administration to refashion and reshape the Defense Force into that which I believe it was intended to be. As noted in the objects and reasons of the Defense Amendment Bill 2020, which seeks to amend the law relating to enlistment and retirement, it explains that Section 17 is being amended to extend the term of enlistment, which is currently 25 years, to 30 years of service. Additionally, Section 18 of the Act is being amended to increase the years of service and re-engagement of enlisted personnel in the force beyond the current compulsory retirement age of 55 to the age of 60, or the attainment of 40 years of service. Similarly, Mr. Speaker, the objects and reasons of the amendment of the retirement of subordinate correctional officers and for connected matters indicate that this amendment to the Correctional Services Bill Act of 2014 will move the retirement age of subordinate correctional officers from 50 years of age to 55. And so, Mr. Speaker, North Abaco is honored to have the privilege of participating in this debate because for me, the amendments we seek to implement today, which were promised to the Marines and warrant officers of the Royal Bahamas Defense Force during the last general election campaign is somewhat personal, as I spent some 36 years of my life in the force. And so, Mr. Speaker, I pray that prison officers will understand if I focus more of my intervention on that of the Defense Force, as I think the minister, the substantive minister, quite adequately addressed the prison as he did the Defense Force. You know, Mr. Speaker, I remember quite well when I got a call on the road walking in Harbour Cove from the now Prime Minister, who asked me about this amendment, and which was being fully supported at the time by us and by those that we spoke to in the communities. And I think he was in Elusa somewhere, and he indicated that this, upon coming to power, this is one of the things that we would do for the members of the Royal Bahamas Defense Force. And I am so pleased that today we are able to do this. Mr. Speaker, it has been a long source of consternation for me, personally, in the current circumstances, that commissioned officers of the Royal Bahamas Defense Force can work up to age 65 years of age, which is the national retirement age, and enlisted personnel were forced to retire at age 55. In my humble estimation, coming through as an enlisted person and then later on becoming a commissioned officer, I thought this was not right. You know, having joined the organization as an enlisted person, I have always found Section 18 of the Defense Act particularly odious. I thought that apart from being unfair to the ratings, who make up the bulk of the force, and the enlisted corps and their families it impacted, it also diminished the operational efficacy of the organization by the forced retirement of these well-qualified, well-experienced, and well-fit Marines to be forced out at age 55. Can you imagine they telling you can't be the speaker when you turn 55? And you're still able to serve. Can you imagine any of us in here, right? So it resulted, Mr. Speaker, I believe, in an unintended consequence associated with the force of losing many of its experts and specialists at the very height of their productive years. Mr. Speaker, the myriad demands for officers and Marines of the force to serve in sundry and diverse jobs, as explained by the minister, across the broad spectrum of traditional service duties and national imperatives, demand that we move to retain some of these specialists, personnel, who we wish to serve beyond the age of 55. Section 18 of the Act at present prescribes for the re-engagement and continuation of warrant officers and Marines in the regular force as follows. Notwithstanding in Section 17, any Marine of the regular force who at any time has completed 25 years of service or such other prescribed period may, with the approval of the competent authority, there's more than one competent authority, the Commander of the Defense Force, who speaks for his senior command staff, is described in the Defense Force Act as the competent authority to speak on behalf of that organization, will re-engage with the regular force for such further period or periods of service as may be prescribed until he attains the age of 55. Regulation 11, paragraphs 1 and 2 of the Defense Regular Force Enlistment and Service Regulation provides for the re-engagement of warrant officers and Marines after 25 years of service as follows. A warrant officer or Marine may, subject to the approval of the minister and in a manner set out in the form in the second schedule, from time to time, re-engage for any period in the regular force, beginning on the expiration of his then current engagement, but so that a total period of 25 years pensionable service in the regular force shall not be exceeded. Paragraph 2. Notwithstanding anything in paragraph 1, a warrant officer, or Marine of the regular force who at any time has completed 25 years of pensionable service may, in accordance with Section 18 of the Act, be granted further yearly extensions to service in the regular force until he attains the age of 55. So what happened was this: 3 to 5 years. Following your attainment of 25 years of service, which we are now moving to 30 years, you are then re-engaged on a yearly basis until you attain the age of 55, which will now move to 60. Members of the regular force are defined in Section 2 of the Act as follows. Marine does not include an officer, but with the modifications contained in this Act, in relation to non-commissioned officers, includes a person who is a non-commissioned officer or of lower rank. And so the enlisted personnel will engage as a Marine recruit, and he can or she can work all the way to the attainment of a force chief, which is the penultimate rate within the enlisted structure. The commissioned officer will join as a midshipman and works all the way to Commodore or Commander Defense Force through his rank structure. And so in the force, what you have is somewhat of a dichotomy, where you have the enlisted personnel and then you have the commissioned officers who serve as the executives of the organization. That's the way the Navy is set up, you know? The Navy is set up in a somewhat of a segregated fashion, but all together as a collective, the Navy makes one good solid whole in the way that it is structured. I'm going to be very brief. And so based on the foregoing provisions, warrant officers and Marines are members of the regular force, Mr. Speaker, are permitted to serve until the vested pensionable period of 25 years, that's in the current construct, on a renewable prescribed 3 or 5 year periods before qualifying for pension. And so following the attainment of these 25 years, these persons are able to remain in the force on a year-to-year renewable contract until, as indicated, age 55, which we will now move to 60. This is important. It's very important, Mr. Speaker. Resultantly, at present, all members of the regular force are compulsorily retired at the age of 55, with no recourse for further service in the regular force. Consequently, the force is prematurely deprived of the potential contributions of yet capable warrant officers and Marines at the apex of their career. Something got to be wrong with that picture. So what you have is, Mr. Speaker, a Marine who will join the Defense Force at 18 and acquire along the way all kinds of experience, all kinds of professional education, because there's a lot of recurrent training all over the world. And when he reaches that full age of maturation, you know what I mean when you reach 55, Mr. Speaker. When he reaches that full age of maturation, the system says to him, it's time for you to get up. And so you then deprive those who serve with him, those subordinate Marines who serve alongside him, of the use of his experience, of his expertise, of his professionalism, and of the things that he could transfer to these youngsters as they come up. And then the process continues over generation after generation. It takes a tremendous amount of investment in time, in training, and in treasure to achieve the level of expertise reposed in the force's senior enlisted population. Senior enlisted persons in the force, as in like institutions, provide distinct skills vital to the functioning of the service. Among them, Mr. Speaker, believe it or not, are qualified chefs, and engineers, and mechanics, and radio and electrical technicians, instructors, armorers, military divers, physical training experts, protocol officers, yes, weapons specialists, quartermasters, or expert navigators and others. We, by doing what we're doing in this place today, will retain the knowledge, the expertise, and the ability of these senior enlisted persons who can now go to age 60 in the service to pass on or to transfer and to improve what we do in the Royal Bahamas Defense Force. Simply put, the forced retirement of such Marines who are yet willing and capable of serving is counterproductive to the growth and development of the force. Ultimately, not only does the organization lose their hard-earned skills and expertise through their forced retirement in the current construct, but it also loses the intangible benefits of their mentorship and professional guidance. I heard a story once where someone was talking about some young elephants, bulls, who would run into the village and wreak havoc, Mr. Speaker. And that happened because they put the old bulls in a different place and allowed, that's where it was, Minister? And allowed the youngsters to just run around wreaking havoc without guidance. Without guidance, right? But they realized that when they put the elder elephants back in the park, order came immediately. And the youngsters fell right in line, you know? I'm not indicating that there is disorder. And some of the old bulls need to remain around for a while to keep order. But it is necessary, Mr. Speaker. As a young Marine, I looked up to the elder Marines for guidance. And when they call upon you to conduct boardings at the wee hours of the morning, I felt all right because I know Henschel Pratt was standing there looking over my shoulder, who came from the Police Marine. I felt okay when I saw the elders who could guide you and tell you, be careful for this and be careful for that. And that's what we're trying to do with these amendments. We're trying, Mr. Speaker, to extend not only the life and livelihood of these Marines who, you know, my wife and I took a mortgage quite early. We got married quite young, you know. I was like 23, she was about 19. Thank God we're still here. We're still here, man. Right? And yeah. And so you take a mortgage. And over the course of a 25-year career, Mr. Speaker, you likely have to go back to the bank at least 3 times to remortgage. Because you got to do the maintenance, you got kids that got to go to school, you know, further charges. That's what they call. That's what they call further charges. And Mr. Speaker, can you imagine a man at 55, which is relatively a young age now, relatively a very young age with life expectancy now, right? Having to find another career at age 55, a youngster. And then he's then still yet 10 years away from the mandatory or the national retirement age, I believe is 65, right? He's 10 years away from that. Now, if you determine to do what some have done, which is you take your game to the road, you qualify in another profession, and you're able at 18 if you join to be about 43, I think it is, when you could retire. Minister of Social Services shaking his head, he'd been there, right? And you're able then to couple or double that career and take a pension that you've earned and then do something else. But if you want to stay, all we are saying to you now, Marines and warrant officers in the Royal Bahamas Defense Force, that if you want to stay to help continue to grow and build your force and to take you to a period where you can be more comfortable financially in your family. Say again? We're going to be able to do that. I only got a couple more pages, but you can take a break if you wish. And you can. It's up to you. Huh? Let me see.
Chair recognizes the honorable member for Bamboo.
Mr. Speaker, given the fact that we are, yeah, Mr. Speaker, I just move a motion that the business of the House to continue beyond 1 p.m. But immediately after the seconder will then break the line. Speaker, I'll again stand and move that we move.
Thank you. Honorable members, it has been moved and seconded that the business of this House to extend beyond the 1 p.m. hour. As many as are in favor will remain seated. Those who oppose will stand. So ordered that the business of this House will extend beyond the 1 p.m. hour. The chair recognizes the honorable member for North Abaco.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So, Mr. Speaker, over a 25-year period, as I was indicating, you likely took out a couple mortgages because you had some further charges. You have kids by now that are ready for tertiary level education. And you know, life intervenes. Sometimes marriages don't hold the way, you know, we intended at the outset. And so some individuals end up with 2 homes that they got to start over. No, this reality, man. Young people say this real talk, right? They have to start over, and at 55, starting over without certainty or surety of your future could be a very daunting outlook on life. And so these amendments will allow for Marines and prison officers, Mr. Speaker, to be more comfortable in their outlook as they approach retirement, because this extends them financially as well as professionally. And I think the government of the Bahamas of today ought to be commended for thinking about these Marines and prison officers in this fashion. And so ultimately, not only does the organization, Mr. Speaker, lose their hard-earned skills, but these Marines lose the ability to really live the lives that they had become accustomed to living. Now, Mr. Speaker, this is not an opportunity for the slackers. This is not an opportunity for the slackers. And if you in the military or in the police force or any security service, you know what I mean when we say slackers. This is not an opportunity for someone who wishes to stay around until you're 60 and not being productive in which you seek to stay. And so what has to happen now, Mr. Speaker, is those who are responsible for reporting on personnel must do so honestly. If you work in the government, you know that you will read a file, glowing reports of what so-and-so is capable of doing. And then you ask the fellow who wrote that report, do you want to keep him in your department? No, sir. And you wonder why. It's because we have become used to not writing honestly on files. The commander, the defense force, the competent authority will still have the same ability as you seek to enlist on a yearly basis to say yay or nay, because you only want to retain the best of the best. That's what you're seeking to do. You want to retain the best of your professionals and experts to benefit the force. And so the youngsters who are still there don't have to be threatened by these amendments. You know, I heard the minister say that you're not going to be disenfranchised. You joined under a particular terms of engagement, and that will run the course of your career, because we won't look retrospective at the law. We must always look forward at the law. And so, Mr. Speaker, besides the requirement to protect the sovereign integrity and maritime domain of the country, this force will be better positioned to take care of the mandates explicated by the minister. And we saw it in real time in Dorian and their response. And we've been seeing it since Hurricane Andrew in the way that these organizations, particularly the Defense Force, was able to respond. And so, Mr. Speaker, I want to cut short here. The forced retirement system, as in most countries, is a government finance contributory pension scheme that serves to incentivize the retention of standing military force. Entitlement for pension is based on years of service, and in the present construct, members become vested after 25 years, but may continue in service, as indicated before. Increasing the age limit for the retirement of enlisted personnel, then, Mr. Speaker, in the force by 5 years is unlikely to have a noticeable impact on the force's current pension scheme, or more directly on the public treasury. Because by doing what we are doing, is we are giving people the ability to move further down the line to near the national retirement age. So the Minister responsible for NIB, who I see sitting there, will not have them to worry about in the immediate future. And so undeniably, the services present, at present we have non-contributory pension, a non-contributory pension structure, Mr. Speaker, which all falls to the government to be able to provide the pension that these individuals have attained. And so at present, someone joining the organization at 18, Mr. Speaker, becomes pensionable at 43. That's pretty young. And so most cases, these persons are reasonably fit, they're healthy, and capable of working for another 22 years at least, or so before reaching that national retirement age of 65. Many countries for wide-ranging reasons have either amended their laws to allow members of the military to serve beyond the age of 55, or they are in the process thereof. Some of them, I can tell you, Canada, United Kingdom, United States, the Army and the Navy, made provisions for senior enlisted persons to go beyond. And so studies on the subject elsewhere demonstrate that the increasing compulsory retirement age in the military results in a minuscule impact on the service as it relates to the retention and advancement of enlisted personnel. They won't get in the way by remaining. They won't get in the way of your advancement as a young Marine. You need not fear the older guys sticking around a little longer. They won't get in the way. It is maintained that discharge rates remain virtually unchanged and advancement vacancies remain stable. Age distribution remains constant and annual intake requirements become less. Legitimate concerns associated with extending the force's present compulsory retirement age that include, but are not by no means limited to, the advancement vacancies, the opening of the floodgates, which we spoke to, budgetary constraints due to longer terms for those filling certain positions in billets, is an unlikely problem. Moreover, the retention of personnel beyond the present enforced separation age will immediately provide a cadre of qualified service members to fill existing and emerging billets, enhance the development of junior Marines and officers. There's a young officer that I serve with who now sits on the bench of the Supreme Court. And I like to think that I had, as a senior enlisted person, had some hand in his development as a young naval officer. He was one of the brightest and one of the best that I had ever have the privilege to serve alongside. But he was young, a youngster. And young officers need senior enlisted personnel to tell them, listen, this is what you learn in Naval Academy, but this is how it's done in the fleet. This is how you really take up an anchor, or this is how you really do a boarding or search a key. And that is very important for senior enlisted personnel to be able to be engaged by their junior officers to help in the development process. And so, Mr. Speaker, let me reemphasize that the change we effect in this place today demands an urgent departure from the status quo, which discourages non-productivity through a perfunctory re-engagement. We want you to be productive. We want you to be productive when you take advantage of what the government is doing here today. Therefore, the practice of token reporting on subordinates and fulfillment of the obligatory advancement or re-engagement exercise must be replaced by sincere and forthright reporting that is reflective of the true disposition of personnel seeking to advance or wishing to continue in the service beyond the present vesting period. Only then will the service reflect a professional cadre of the best personnel to the task of shaping the type of organization that we all desire and depend on. Only then will the force, by the extension, the country, benefit from the retention of the best of the best. And so, Mr. Speaker, North Abaco is therefore honored to second the Defense Amendment Bill 2020 and the Correctional Service Amendment Bill 2020. I thank you.
Thank you, Honorable Member. Honorable member, just before I put the motion, I just want to, which I neglected to do earlier, I wanted to table the publication from Island Lad to Honored Statesman of the Bahamas, a brief biography of the Honorable James Oswald Inglewood, ordered that the publication do lie on the table. Honorable members, it has been moved and seconded that the following bill be read for a second time and committed. A bill for an act to amend the law relating to the retirement of subordinate correctional officers and for connected matters. As many? The chair recognizes the honorable member for Cat Island, Runke, and San Salvador. Thank you, honorable member. The chair recognizes the honorable member for Bamboo Town.
Mr. Speaker, I do now move that the business of this House be suspended until 3 p.m. today.
Did I hear 2 p.m. or 3 p.m.? 3 p.m. Honorable members, it has been moved and seconded that the business of this House do suspend until 3 p.m. this afternoon. As many as are in favor will remain seated. Those who oppose will stand. The business of this House stands suspended until 3 p.m. this afternoon.